Welcome to Teaching Psychoanalysis Effectively on Zoom. I'm Heather Craige, along with Kendra Sermitis. Both of us are members of the Psychoanalytic Center of the Carolinas. I'm a clinical social worker and psychoanalyst working in Raleigh, North Carolina, in practice for more than 40 years. As a member of the faculty of the PCC, I've developed and taught many courses over the years, including the therapist's creative use of the self, deepening treatment, attachment in adult psychotherapy, trauma in the body in psychoanalytic treatment, and intersubjectivity in relational psychoanalysis. Kendra.
Hello, my name is Dr. Kendra Sermitis, and I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor in private practice here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where I practice both psychoanalysis and counseling. Complementing my clinical work, I completed my doctoral degree at the College of William and Mary, where I studied counselor education. And currently I serve as an associate faculty member affiliated with Prescott College. As an active member of the PCC, I serve on the board of directors, and recently I co-taught the course on deepening the treatment alongside Heather. I'd like to invite you into our agenda for today's presentation, but first I want to tell you about Heather and I's mission and idea for hosting this presentation together. We decided to create this workshop to perhaps meet a need of other educators who are also working to create positive learning experiences in psychoanalysis online. We know that research suggests that adults have an attention span between 8 seconds and 10 minutes when engaging in an online program. Even though our students are adults who have a strong motivation to become stronger clinicians, they've also been known to become glossy-eyed, withdrawn during classes on Zoom. So we're here to offer you some methods to organize your teaching so that students are more highly engaged. We plan to demonstrate as well as explain these methods and hope that you take away at least 3 new ideas to enliven your own teaching. You're encouraged to see what appeals to you uniquely and to make subtle shifts in your teaching if that feels possible. So let's begin with our agenda. Remember, adults learn best when they're relaxed, alert, not stressed, and not anxious. So by providing structure and a pattern for your class that's known in advance, students may feel more calm and engaged. So without further ado, our presentation will include the following agenda, organized into 7 chunks. First, creating a welcoming atmosphere. Second, we'll talk about identifying your theory of adult learning. Third, we will engage in active participation. Fourth, we'll explore clarifying your own teaching philosophy. Fifth, we'll be developing a lively mini lecture. Sixth, we'll be selecting and assigning readings. And 7, we'll leave with the idea of rupture and repair as a part of an engaged, lively online classroom. Now, Heather will talk about fostering a welcoming atmosphere on Zoom. Heather?
So it's easy to gripe about teaching or learning on Zoom. Folks can feel isolated in their little boxes, and we all miss having natural social interaction. It's important while teaching on Zoom to create a welcoming atmosphere and to actively provide opportunities for students to connect with you and their classmates. And it's important to give everyone multiple opportunities to speak in class that are not threatening. I like to begin every class with something I call popcorn. Let's do this together. Take a moment to bring to mind an excellent teacher. Could be from any phase of your life. What qualities made them a great teacher? And how did they make you feel about yourself? Pause the video now and take a minute to picture that teacher and reflect on these questions. You might jot down a few words. Now, if this were a live program, I'd say, I want everyone to answer in popcorn style, 1 or 2 words or a short sentence. I want to hear everybody's voice, so wave your hand big and I'll call your name. Unmute yourself when I call on you. So I think of my piano teacher, Francesca, and whenever she would assign a new piece for me to play, she'd play it for me. And she would convey such a passion for the music. And also she would convey confidence in me that I could learn this piece.
For me, Heather, similar to Francesca, who comes to mind is my doctoral advisor, Dr. Rip McAdams at the College of William and Mary. And he conveyed so much trust and such a strong investment in my potential. He worked with me one-on-one throughout my entire dissertation process, and line by line, had the attention and curiosity and care for me to really explore my ideas. I left that season of my academic life feeling so much more confident and invested in because of his care.
Yeah. So, with my teacher, we had the idea of passion for the subject and also confidence in me. And Kendra's teacher was very personally invested in her learning. So it's nice to echo back what you've just heard from students one by one and to recognize them as well as highlight certain important points that they're making. So doing this workshop live, we demonstrated a few methods for creating a welcoming atmosphere and for actively engaging your students. So for example, Kendra and I were on the call 10 minutes early to greet everyone. We welcomed each person by name. Then we let you know what we're going to do by showing our agenda. We started off by asking a question that anyone can answer briefly, and we would respond to everyone we spoke. And remember, the first question we asked today is very closely tied to why you're here. You want to be an even better teacher. So giving credit, I've started opening my classes with 10 minutes of popcorn ever since Dawn Skorczewski spoke to our faculty about teaching a few years ago. She told us that if a student does not have an opportunity to speak within the first 15 minutes of class, they will not speak at all. That idea stuck with me, and so I try to give every student a chance to speak at the start, to prime the pump for engagement, and in a way that they can't fail or feel embarrassed. There are many ways to create a welcoming environment. Before teaching a new course, I ask each student to complete a student information sheet. Some students have a phone meeting some teachers have a phone meeting with each student before class begins, and some have office hours when students may check in. So for creating a welcoming environment, the main points are: think about ways to get to know your students, greet them by name, and give them many easy opportunities to speak in class. And so now Kendra will speak about the theory of adult learning.
Thank you, Heather. In this attitude of respect and curiosity about our students, I'd like to introduce this idea of adult learning theory. As teachers, our job is to facilitate learning, not just deliver it, but to create an experience. We have to hold our students in mind in that process. Why are they here? Why are they individually motivated to learn with us? What experiences do they uniquely bring to the classroom? Learning is a co-constructed responsibility shared between faculty and students alike. And I'd like to credit here the work of Malcolm Knowles. Malcolm talks about the 6 principles of adult learning that really we can bring alive in our psychoanalytic classrooms. First, we know that our students learn best when they are understood through their own self-concept, sense of autonomy, independence, and self-directional capacity. They want to feel engaged and that they have some power and investment in their time with us in the learning space. Adults also gravitate towards materials that matter to them. Readiness to learn is correlated positively with recognition of use and practicality. Essentially, what that means is that our adult students really want to know how and why what we're teaching matters to them. Third, adult learners appreciate immediate application over future potential use of material. So asking them to apply content to clinical work or themselves in the moment can be very useful. Adults are also motivated by personal factors rather than any external pressures or standards. And so if we know what those personal factors are, we take the time to get to know them, understand their why, we can bring that into the classroom, thus encouraging engagement. Adult learners also value the why of what they're learning in new material, and it ought to be situated to their lived experience and their clinical atmospheres. And last, adult learners build from their repository of previous experience and lessons. So if we know more about the foundation that they're coming in with, the previous work experience they've had, we can help them actively draw and build out a framework that starts from their work is really the foundation. So we encourage you, become aware of your students' intrinsic motivation. What is their why? Their personal foundation to learning will increase motivation if we make that very present consistently in the classroom. We help them think about their application of these new ideas to their work. We create a space for learners to express those lived experiences and verbalize their reflections. I also want to acknowledge, there's a real utility to expressing gratitude to our students as well. We know that our students are voluntarily present in our classrooms, usually after a pretty long day of work or childcare. And when we recognize that verbally, let them know that we're grateful for their time, their investment, time away from family. We're expressing gratitude for their decision to show up. And that seems to help them recognize that this is a special and meaningful place for us too. So in summary, the main point is the instructor is encouraged to intentionally facilitate student-centric learning, learning that's positioned in the student's mind, their life, tune into students' interests and help them connect with those lived experiences with patients and in themselves. Heather?
As you're speaking about adult learning, a swimming analogy is coming to mind. And, I was thinking about the two extreme examples of how you might introduce children to swimming, right? The teacher might swim back and forth, demonstrating various strokes while the children watched passively from the sidelines in stunned silence. The other extreme is to throw the children into the deep end and see what happens, probably lots of screaming and fear. I experienced both approaches during my psychoanalytic education, sadly. There's the teacher who speaks the entire time and may know a lot, but the students are silenced. And then there's the teacher who provides nothing but a vague question, such as, what did you think about the articles? And the students flail around for 90 minutes. So we're suggesting a different path, one that is tuned into where the swimmers are in their learning. With new swimmers, you want them to feel safe in the water and to feel that swimming is fun. And you scaffold their skills in a sequence so that the children can feel successful. And with your higher level swim team, you might be aiming differently, perhaps to streamline their technique to be faster and less effortful. But in either case, you're using your skills to support their learning. You play to their motivation. And just remember, our students really want to learn. They want to understand themselves better and to be better therapists. Well, with that said, I'm going to talk about creating a teaching plan for each class. So Zoom has many advantages. It allows us to reach many more students and to serve students living at a distance. And it also offers the opportunity for a democratic classroom. We're all in our little boxes, all of equal size, and everyone can be heard and seen. So unlike a typical small seminar classroom in person, to teach effectively on Zoom, you have to be more organized. We suggest breaking up your classes into short and varied segments. That's one key to creating a lively Zoom classroom. So I make a teaching plan for each class, and it's broken up into short chunks, 10 or 15 minutes long. And I stick with that structure throughout the course. This pattern works well for classes on theory and technique, but not, of course, for case conference. I'm going to show you what I do, but the important thing is to have a plan and structure for your class that fits with your personality. What you do will depend on your subject and the needs of your students. So here's how I'm going to talk you through how I organize a 90-minute class. So very first thing is we have, greetings, of course, greetings by name, and then we have popcorn. So everybody speaks to one easy question. And it's really just a sentence or two from each person. That might take up to 15 minutes. And the question I'm going to ask is tightly tied to the topic of the evening, but it's something everybody can answer. Then I go into usually a mini lecture for about 15 minutes. And I try to give a case example to illustrate what I'm talking about. And I'm going to give another segment later in this talk about how to create a mini lecture that's engaging. So after that, we usually have 15 minutes or so for a large group discussion. And this could be a Q&A, or there could be a discussion of a case vignette, again, that's on point. Usually I start with a question for the group. And then I respond to each student by echoing what they said and maybe expanding on what they said. So I use each comment as an opportunity for teaching. So now we're 45 minutes into our class, and I offer a 5-minute bio break. Everyone can get up, walk around, get a cup of tea, and come back in exactly 5 minutes. Then we have small breakout groups. And these are very important. I think if your class is greater than 8 students, you should use breakout groups. Groups of 4 students. I appoint one person to be what I call the point person, and they keep everybody on schedule and on the question that I've offered. I never send people out with just go talk to each other, because that's really not what we're doing here. There's a specific question that is geared to help the students try on the concept that we're studying. They try it on themselves, or they try it on a case. Okay, so that's always the question. And I define that for each session. After the breakout group, which usually lasts about 20 minutes, there's often time for a large group debrief where main points are discussed or questions. And at the very end, there's 5 minutes to forecast the topic and the homework for the next week. So that's that's the template I use. So now here's what I do to engage students in their reading at home. And this prepares them to engage in class at the next session. I typically send a homework assignment on the day after class, including the readings for the next class. I always ask them to do something to focus their attention while reading. It might be as simple as note what feels like a new or exciting or confusing or disturbing idea to you. And for homework, I ask for a small bit of writing that will prepare them for the next class. So for example, if we're reading an article about the frame, I'd ask, number 1, write out a definition of the frame in analytic treatment. And number 2, write an example from your own work or your own treatment, or a work of fiction or film where the frame is transgressed. So these questions focus their reading, and they prime them to be ready for the next class for the small group and large group discussions. Like my colleague, Catherine Broadway, likes to ask students to do their reading early in the week, not the night before class, so that they can sit with these questions all week while they're talking with their patients. So my emphasis is on giving students many opportunities to try on new ideas, as if they're trying on clothing, to see how these ideas fit on themselves and on their patients. They don't have to like the new idea, they just have to try it on. And for example, when students are primed during homework to write a brief example of a breach in the frame, they'll be ready to share that case example in their small group. If they've done their homework, they'll be ready to speak in class, and they'll feel successful. I can't say enough good things about using breakout groups. They build relationships between students and can make up for the lack of in-person contact. They're not hard to set up. Zoom has excellent short videos on how to work with breakout groups. Now, I like to keep the same groups intact throughout the course. And so I take another step before class begins. I circulate the names of students to the whole group and ask if anyone has a conflict or dual relationship with any other student. I usually say something funny like, is anyone else in the class, like an ex-lover or an arch enemy, so that we're not in the same group. And then I arrange the groups both to avoid conflicts, and I attempt to combine the students with similar levels of experience. Another important idea is to solicit feedback from the class. At the midpoint, email the class a short evaluation form and ask them return it to you by email at least 2 days before the next class. Review these carefully and give feedback to the whole group. Now, this gives you a chance to be responsive to the students and to make changes in direction while there's still time. So the main point here is have a plan for your teaching that helps students to try on new ideas on themselves and on their cases. So Kendra now is going to talk about your teaching philosophy.
Great. Thank you, Heather. Now, Heather gave us some great ideas about the detail and the texture of the learning environment, the different ways we can use breakout rooms and engage communication and reflection. And now I'm going to ask us to pull out and look at sort of a meta philosophy of what's happening in your classroom. This is going to be unique to you as an instructor. Having a teaching philosophy is a bit like a mission statement as an educator. It's a declaration of your framework for thinking and engaging. It's similar to having a theoretical orientation. Richard Almond has one of my favorite articles about how a theoretical orientation can be a holding environment for the therapist. Because there's scaffolding and structure to the therapist's mind and their conceptual framework, it can sort of loosen to the experience, have a deeper experience of their client and the clinical process. Similarly, a teaching philosophy can help hold you up and hold your ideas and practices as an educator together. We want to start thinking about our teaching philosophy from the mindset of ourselves as an aspirational teacher. So for a moment, think about who you aspire to be as an educator. Try and write your teaching philosophy, again, similar to a mission statement, from that state of mind. This ought to give you a glimpse of your classroom. So if someone were to have access to your teaching philosophy, they may be able to imagine what it would be like to be a student of yours. So how do we go about creating a philosophy? I'm going to guide us through a few questions. What I'd encourage you to do is just to see what comes up. Later, you might take some time to more thoroughly explore your responses, but this might give us a good start during this workshop together. So I'll begin with, what is your why for teaching psychoanalytic ideas? Hold in mind your end goal for your students, and that may differ across developmental and experiential levels. Which values do you hold as essential to a learning environment? And how do those values inform the atmosphere of your classroom? How do you conceptualize learning? What is your role in the learning process? How do you interact with your students? And how does that relate to your goals? I'd encourage you to create 1 to 2 examples of how you demonstrate your role in the facilitation of these end goals for your students. Which methods make sense for you to apply? Perhaps you're a lecturer. Maybe you like student-led discussions, presentations. Perhaps you appreciate role plays, or maybe you take on more creative endeavors with your students. But this statement ought to reflect those parts of your mindset as an educator and the experience you're trying to create. Briefly, I'll tell you 2 examples of teaching philosophy. One comes from Thomas Ogden. His theory of teaching psychoanalysis frames the teaching experience as more of an art that involves an effort to create clearances in which fresh forms of thinking and dreaming emerge. And this might relate more so to Heather's advanced swimmers. But some of these methods that Thomas Ogden would use include, first, the classroom's out loud reading of texts, line by line, and discussion of the experience of the reader. Number 2, he'd employ clinical case conceptualizations as a collective dreaming experience. Third, engage students in reading poetry and fiction as a method of enhancing capacity for aliveness and use of language. And 4, learning to forget what one has previously learned. These are unique, again, to Thomas Ogden. Maybe we can borrow from some of these ideas and think about why they appeal to us. Another brief example is the teaching philosophy of learners and student development offered by Maria Baxter-Magolda. And she writes about self-authoring. That is a guiding principle in her teaching philosophy. She talks about the internal capacity to define one's beliefs, one's own identity, and social relationships. In her framework, learners are encouraged to integrate knowledge, content, experiences, values through a reflective process. So you'll feel reflection is prioritized in her approach to teaching. Students develop across 3 factors in her mind: intrapsychically, so how they understand the interior of themselves and their value systems. Interpersonally, how they engage with each other in the learning space, and epistemological development. And this one's very important. The idea here is that a developed student will recognize that they can create new and original ideas, and that that's valuable and valid. Her methodologies might include moving from following formulas to having more of an internal foundation as a professional, exposing students to her own questions, and last and related, she'd model inner curiosity and tolerance for not knowing. So again, you might go back and ask some of these questions of yourself and design a short mission statement, a philosophy of how you are theoretically holding your learning environment. Again, similar to your theoretical orientation to your clinical work. And with that, Heather's going to talk to us about developing a lively mini lecture.
Thanks, Kendra. So earlier, I showed you how I structure my classes with time for a short lecture, just 10 or 15 minutes long. So the lecture provides context and focus for the class. I try to convey why I chose this article, maybe why I love it, who's the author, where do they fit into the course of psychoanalytic history. I highlight the main ideas from the reading and how I use the main idea or ideas in my practice with a brief clinical vignette. So here's an example of a mini lecture. I'm just going to do one right now. So for today, we have all read Anthony Bass's famous paper, When the Frame Doesn't Fit the Picture. So here's Anthony Bass, who's alive and well, practicing in New York City. He's affiliated with the NYU postdoc program and founded the International Association for Relational Psychoanalysis and Psychotherapy. Check them out. They have very good conferences. So he fits into the analytic family tree among the relational psychoanalysts. Let's have that slide, please. And this is a very funny family tree that was loaned to me by, I'm sorry, Chris Evans. And you see the arrows go all which way, and you can't read it from where you are, but Freud's at the very top, and then we have Anna Freud and Melanie Klein in the first big split, and we have the various object relations theorists and the ego psychologists and the interpersonalists and the feminists, the Lacanians, self-psychologists, and down near the bottom are the relational theorists, and which many schools pool into, and that is where we find Anthony Bass. Okay, we have another, let's see. So, I love this paper because it's well written and illustrates the best of a relational approach in which the therapist struggles with decisions to adapt the frame to fit a patient's particular needs while maintaining an analytic process. So the concept I want to zero in on right now is, what do we mean by the frame? So you can think of the frame as a set of ground rules or agreements that make the psychoanalytic process possible. It's about the schedule, payments, missed sessions. The frame holds and protects you as well as the treatment. So here we have some illustrations of frames provided by Kendra. The frame on the left looks kind of blown out. And the one on the right has got something growing on it. It's being impinged upon, and the one in the middle is just right. The frame sets the art apart from the wall. And it's just like the walls of a swimming pool that hold the water in, right? Without the walls, the water just falls out. Okay, and also like a sanctuary space in which we observe certain rules of dress and behavior, and we can agree on the time for showing up for service. The walls of the sanctuary separate sacred space from ordinary space. But why? And that's so that something different can go on inside that space. In a similar way, the frame protects the analytic relationship and process. We both show up in order to create space for a deep understanding of the patient and their difficulties. We are paid because we're skilled at this work, but also because we are giving ourselves over completely for that hour to listen to and to be impacted upon by our patients. which is a rare thing in this life. So at this point in my mini lecture, I'd probably give a juicy example of how I use this concept in my work. And that's the end of my sample mini lecture. So as you prepare your lecture, consider, what is my attitude toward the reading? Remember that you're introducing your students to a complex tradition with many brilliant thinkers who are in dialogue and actually arguing with each other. You want your students to become familiar with the language of psychoanalysis and how the major arguments have evolved over time. People in psychoanalysis disagree a lot, and the students should feel free to question what they're learning. Don't teach as though the readings are holy texts, but rather something we can think about and argue with. As you lecture, be sure to use plain language when explaining psychoanalytic concepts and their application in therapy. And this is so that your students learn how to speak with their patients in plain language. Psychoanalysis has its own strange vocabulary. It's really a kind of foreign language. So take care to explain terms of art and even how the same word may be used differently by different psychoanalytic writers. So after the mini lecture is over, I would lead off the discussion with a few specific questions. Like, give some examples of what might constitute the frame. What do you all do in your practice? I would get specific about time, about money, about missed sessions. If I were teaching a whole series of classes on the frame, I'd ask my students to write out their policies related to the frame. In the next homework assignment, I would have them do that. And then in a later class, I'd focus on what we could learn about the patients and their playing around with the frame. And in another class, I'd focus on what we can learn about you, the student, the therapist, in how you maintain the frame. For example, your feelings of sadism or guilt that might lead you to ignore breaks in the frame. And I'd hit on the importance of being the good enough and also the bad enough therapist. Having a frame provides something to fight with you about. Before closing this section on giving a mini lecture, I want to encourage you to watch a set of short videos, just 30 minutes long, on teaching by Deborah Cabanis. She is part of the Columbia Psychoanalytic Center, has written a number of books, and is a leader in psychoanalytic education. We'll be including the link in the reference pages at the end of this video. She advocates teaching to your learning objectives rather than teaching the article. At one dramatic moment in her video, she throws a stack of psychoanalytic articles on the floor. It really is a peculiar part of our psychoanalytic culture that we teach articles, often as if they are a kind of scripture. So be clear with yourself, what psychoanalytic concepts, what technical skills am I trying to convey today in my classroom? Focus there. So the main point on planning a mini lecture is, you're not teaching the article. You're using the article and its case examples to teach an important psychoanalytic concept or technique. So now Kendra will talk about selecting readings.
Thank you, Heather. Yes, as we're talking about articles, this calls attention to how we choose our articles for our classroom. And with so many, I think, decades and as we saw the family tree, there's really a plethora of articles and eras and people that we can choose from when we lift voices into the reading, into the classroom. And so we think it's important to make sure that you're selecting pieces that are written by people who represent a variety of identities and offer critiques. Perhaps we, include differences in racial identity, sexual orientation, age, ability, even regions and philosophies and psychoanalysis, and be able to have a textured conversation in the classroom. You might offer critiques about the information that's being written. Be prepared to discuss classical articles that might represent misogynistic, homophobic, or racist attitudes. And rather than leaving those articles off of your syllabus, it's important to recognize these really important conversational attitudes and perspectives that certainly impact the history of psychoanalysis and our classrooms today. We want to make sure that we're talking about the intersecting identities in our articles and the clinical dyads. And so that material is important to lift and make awareness of and talk through with our students. We also think it's important to make sure that we're reviewing the accessibility of reading. Make sure that all of your students have equal access to the selected course materials. This is good preparation, good classroom preparation technique, but also it helps students feel respected and on track, therefore more calm and able to learn comfortably in your course. You can ask students for feedback on articles. So sometimes even in classrooms, we'll keep the Zoom chat available. So when a new article is being brought up and we're getting into the summary of the material, students are asked, given a scale from 1 to 5, and 5 being an exceptional article that brought new insight that you really enjoyed, let's go ahead and rate this article. And you'll see the Zoom chat rooms repopulate with different numbers. And that's rich data for us to have when we redesign our class moving forward. You can also ask for a subjective assessment from students, asking them their opinions, especially like Heather mentioned at the midpoint in the course. We believe it's important to review and update your readings regularly each time you teach the class. You can seek help from your curriculum chair. And if you're looking for a particular type of article, you could use your local institute's listserv. You could elicit ideas from APSA or the American Association for Psychoanalysis in Clinical Social Work listservs. Heather, do you have any other ideas?
You can consider using a contemporary textbook to unify your course and then assign supplemental readings along with each chapter. And, remember, it's okay to change up the syllabus as you go through the course. You may find new articles in response to your students' interests, or they might suggest new articles. And then at the end of the course, you just submit your final syllabus with revisions to your training program, which is fine. Well, next I'm going to talk about our last section, which is preparing for rupture and repair. So I like to state early on in class, maybe in the first session, the idea that ruptures are inevitable in therapy, in love relationships, and in the classroom. I think teachers should assume that they're going to screw up, most likely in the areas of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation. So I would just tell the class, when I do or say anything that offends you, please reach out right away after class by phone or email, and then offer to talk with the student, and then address the issue with the whole class if that seems appropriate. It's so easy to make blunders that injure people, and it's really important to have a humble attitude. Anton Hart has written several wonderful articles about this, and he refers to cultural humility. We've put those articles in our reference list at the end of the video. And when students are upset with you, notice your own defensive tendencies. It's really hard to hear that you've injured a student when that was not your intention. But just as you would do in your office or with anyone you love, ask for the student's perspective, tell me more, and really be ready to learn. You probably have things to learn. And also remember that people have a mix of identities that are invisible, and some are privileged, but in that same person, other identities may be oppressed or traumatized. And you won't know about that until you have hurt or angered them. So if an issue comes up in class and you feel at a loss, it's fine to say, I'll think about that and get back to you. Or let's make a plan to talk about that. So the main idea is to have a humble and open attitude in response to criticism from your students. Kendra, other thoughts?
Yeah, Heather, what you're saying is making me think of how important it is to acknowledge the context of our learning environment sort of outside the classroom. So for example, a significant current event here in North Carolina currently is the devastating Hurricane Helene. And in the classroom, it can be so important to acknowledge there is a significant event that certainly is bringing about complex emotion in the room today, and exploring briefly and really containing and acknowledging those felt experiences in the classroom before moving on to the course subject. And I think this is especially important for us on Zoom because as our classrooms are growing and perhaps we have distance learners from other states or even countries, we know that at any given time, there's something that may be affecting our learners and their experience of themselves and each other in this space. And so I think staying aware of what's going on nationally, even internationally, and how this might be on our students' minds helps us create, again, a more caring and comfortable, therefore, educational experience.
And it's another thought too, is it's a nice way to end class every week to invite your students into your psychoanalytic center by sharing good news, telling them about upcoming programs, about study groups, about scholarships. So it's a way of welcoming the students into the organization, and it breaks the sense of being kind of an exclusive club.
We're at the end of our time today for this presentation. And if Heather and I had a live group today, we'd pause now for a 5-minute bio break. And then in small groups, or maybe even in one large group, if we had, maybe 8 students or less, we'd meet in a large space and discuss a few follow-up questions. For example, for today, and maybe you can reflect on these with us, tell us what you'll do to engage your own students. Tell us one big takeaway from this presentation that you plan to incorporate in your teaching. And if you think of it, you can reach out to Heather and I and let us know the answers to these some of these questions that we have.
So before we say goodbye, we invite you to continue to watch until the end of this video. You'll find the various slides, forms, and references that we mentioned during our talk. Very soon, you're going to see a slide with our contact information. So we welcome it. Before you jump back into your day, you might want to take a minute to write an email to me and Kendra and let us know what you're going to take away from this workshop. We're always interested to learn more about how you engage your students. So thank you so much for listening.
Yes, and before you go, I will take a moment to orient you to our additional resources that we have made reference to throughout today's workshop. Remember, this is a recording, so you can move through these quickly, or you can pause and slow us down and really take notice of what we're offering. First, for those of you who are interested in adult learning theory, Malcolm Knowles' Principles of Adult Learning are here and available for you. Heather introduced us into a teaching plan. Again, this very intentional approach, split up into 15-minute segments to really engage your students in an organized, structured way. Heather also explored the mini lecture and discussion. And so if that was appealing to you, you might take a look at how this was designed and apply this to your own lectures moving forward. We have our student info sheet. This is the sheet that's provided before the class so that you can gather important information. Remember, we talked a lot about how motivating students has to do with getting to know them, finding out their unique why. What contexts are they applying this material to so they can do it with immediacy? If we gather some of this experience and insight early, we can start to situate and create a more meaningful, more relevant classroom discussion with them. We have our mid-course evaluation. Again, this is a way to collect student perspectives and perhaps even adapt your learning environment, your classroom plan at the midpoint in the semester of the course. And we have our references available for you for further thinking and exploring. We're so glad that you decided to join us today. Please reach out to Heather and I. We're excited to have you here in teaching psychoanalysis effectively on Zoom.
Bye-bye.